Hi, I'm Jordan Miola, a TV writer, and this video will cover the two different kinds of TV scripts you can write. A TV pilot, which is an original idea, or a spec script of an existing show. A spec script is an episode of an established TV show. You'll take the characters of a show you love and write your own storylines for them. When producers and showrunners ask for script samples, they may ask for one of these two things or one of each. Because I want to, let's go over writing a spec script for an existing show first. I've written spec scripts for The Goldbergs, Broad City, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, AP Bio, 30 Rock, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, and Parks and Recreation. Let's go over how to write a spec of an existing show. We'll go over each of these in more depth, but here's a quick overview. Number 1, you want to watch and research the show. Number 2, write dozens of ideas for different storylines. Number 3, choose your best ideas and write the script. Number 4, rewrite and do table reads. Number 5, submit. Let's go over number 1 first, watch and research. When you find a show you want to spec, watch the show all the time. Watch every single episode of the show. Not only will this help you know the voices of the characters and tone of the show, you'll know what storylines have been done before. Writing a spec script can be so much fun because you deep dive into the characters and you get to know the show in and out. You not only become a fan, you become obsessed with it. When I wrote my 30 Rock spec, I printed out Wikipedia pages of all the characters and highlighted certain things that could be part of my spec script. You want to learn everything about the show in and out. When you spec write a show, you want to find a show that's relatively new. Try to find a show in its first season or maybe entering its second season. This is the sweet spot of spec writing because you can watch all the episodes of that show in a relatively small amount of time. If you choose a show like The Simpsons, for example, then it might take you 2 years to watch every single episode. When I wrote my Broad City spec, it was just after season 1 ended. So everyone who knew the show knew the tone because there was only 1 season. Shows can change tones, so it's always good to find a show that's only a year or 2 in. Brainstorm storyline ideas as you watch the show. You want to brainstorm a bunch of storylines for each character so you can pick and choose later. Also, when you watch the show, take notes. Look for things that no one else is thinking about. As you study the show, you'll begin to see the show differently. Also, take note of how many storylines they have, because in your script, you want to have the same amount of storylines that they do. When I wrote my 30 Rock spec, I noticed there were 3 or 4 storylines for each episode. Sometimes characters like Jenna and Tracy would team up together, but Liz usually always had the A story. And you want to figure out your A story, B story, C story, etc. The A story is usually the most important and is given to the main character. If you watch Frasier, the most significant story of every episode, the A story, goes to Frasier. In SpongeBob SquarePants, the A story is usually about SpongeBob SquarePants. Most of the A stories in The Office are about Michael. Most of the A stories in Breaking Bad are about Walter White. Study how many storylines the show you're speccing has. And every single show is different. Most comedies have an A story, B story, C story, but not all of them. Phil Rosenthal, the creator of Everybody Loves Raymond, points out in his book, You're Lucky You're Funny, that episodes of Raymond usually only had an A story, and every member of the family is involved in that story. Phil felt that B stories weren't needed in half-hour sitcoms, and you only need a strong A story. Most sitcoms tend to have a B story and a C story at least. They might also have a D story or E story for supporting characters. A lot of times, those D stories and E stories are called runners, and they might be a quick running gag that comes in fast and leaves throughout the episode. Also take note, as the letters get closer to Z, the less important the story is. Your A story is the story that drives everything else, and you should put the most time towards the A story. Whatever show you want to spec write, see if you can find an actual script of it. Usually you can find the pilot script of most TV shows by using Google. And you want to Google the name of the show, script, PDF. So for example, when I wrote an episode of The Goldbergs, I just Googled The Goldbergs script PDF, and the second result gave me the script that I could download. You'll notice a lot of pilot scripts, by the way, the title may have changed. If you look at The Goldbergs, for example, the title is How the Hell Am I Normal? They changed it to The Goldbergs in production before the series aired. New Girl was also called Chicks and Dicks. Then they changed the show to New Girl. A few years back, I wrote a TV pilot, first titled Grandma Knows Everything, but people kept remembering it as Grandma Knows Best, so I changed the title to that. And then a producer who I signed with was pitching the show to HBO Max, and she wanted to change the title to Badass Grandma. So we changed it to Badass Grandma. All right, let's get back to structure. Know how many acts the show has. Every TV show is broken down into different parts, which are called acts. Each act is about 9 to 15 pages long. The best way to think about this is acts take place between the commercials. For network TV, every time there's an act break, there's a commercial. For streaming services, you may not have commercials, but you'll usually notice the show will fade out and then fade into a new scene that starts a different act. TV dramas today consist of 5 acts. 5 acts is pretty standard for all 1-hour dramas and 1-hour scripted shows. Comedies tend to be 2 or 3 acts, but there's some comedies now with 4 acts. Traditional sitcoms like Sanford and Son, All in the Family, and I Love Lucy usually only had 2 acts. But as TV changes, so do structure of shows. This is why it's important to know your show and the amount of acts. If you submit your spec script to a professional, they're going to want to know you did your research and you have the correct amount of acts. Here's the structure of an episode of 30 Rock if you were watching it on NBC. Besides acts, most shows start with a cold open or a teaser. These are essentially the same thing, but in sitcoms, they're usually called cold opens. And in dramas, they're called teasers. This is the first scene that grabs the attention of the audience, something that hooks us in. If you watch Poker Face or a CSI type of show, the first scene is usually of someone getting murdered. And this hooks in the audience right away. Then the story will unfold itself and go into Act 1. The Office was known for amazing cold opens. Like that time, Dwight made everyone believe there was a fire in the office, just so he could see how people would react. At the end of every act, there's usually some kind of cliffhanger to make the audience stick around. And if it's network TV, there'll be a commercial break as well. After in Act 1, a network show would have a commercial and then go into Act 2. And then after Act 2, another commercial, which would go into Act 3, and so forth and so on. Lastly, many shows will end with a tag. Like the cold open, this is usually a short scene, and it helps wrap up a small storyline, or it could be a hint of what could happen in the next episode. Or it gives us one more laugh if it's a sitcom. If you ever wondered what sitcom means, sitcom is short for situational comedy. Also, if you're writing a multicam pilot or a single cam pilot, the line spacing may change. Single cam pilots and dramas usually tend to be written in single space, but multicam pilots are usually double spaced within their dialogue. By the way, so you know, multicam sitcoms are shows that usually have a laugh track. Shows like Friends, I Love Lucy, The Big Bang Theory, The Jeffersons, all those shows that have an audience when you're watching the show, those are multicams. Shows that don't have those are usually single cams. Shows like The Office, Arrested Development, Veep, 30 Rock, AP Bio, Parks and Recreation. All those are single cam sitcoms, and there is no live audience. With multicams, you tend to stay with the same sets always, but in single cams, you can move around a lot more and there's more flexibility with where scenes and locations have to be. This is what my pilot Grandma Knows Best looks like as a single cam. But when I tried to get hired for the Frasier reboot, I also made a multicam version of it. It's the same script, but you can see how the format is different, with single cam being single space and multicam being double space. You'll also notice that the action description is in all capital letters in multicams. You want to find sample scripts of the shows you're speccing because you want to know the structure of the show. You want to know the acts. What's the page count usually? Do they have a cold open? Do they not have a cold open? Finding a script of the actual show is really the only way to know this. Also, if you happen to live in Los Angeles or New York City, go to the WGA library and ask for scripts of shows. They usually have more than what you can find online, and they'll have several episodes of several shows. I've gone there and spent days just reading scripts, old and new, from Sanford and Son and I Love Lucy to That 70s Show and Everybody Loves Raymond. Okay, last but not least, know the characters. You might have a good sense of them already if you watch the show a lot that you're speccing. You really want to master their voice and hear how they talk, even when you're sleeping at night. Let those characters haunt you in your dreams, because you'll think of some really good ideas that way. When I wrote my 30 Rock episode, I got obsessed with 30 Rock for a month as I wrote my script. Nobody knew more about 30 Rock than I did when I wrote that script. As you watch the show, write down quirks and little things that characters say that may spark an idea for you. So for example, in 30 Rock, I took note that Tracy Jordan talked about his kid named George Foreman. And after I learned that, I wrote an idea that eventually became my Tracy Jordan storyline. My storyline is Tracy refuses permission to let his son George Foreman take a sex ed class. Instead, Tracy makes an educational film teaching kids about the birds, the bees, and how to get it on. When I wrote a Broad City episode, I watched every episode of Broad City 3 times. Again, I wrote it just after season 1 ended, so there was only 10 episodes to watch, but I watched all 10 of those episodes 3 times within a week. The time you spend writing your spec script is totally up to you. But you want to do a bunch of research and brainstorm and write down ideas as you watch the show. You want to have 30 or 40 storylines to choose from. Then you can start writing. And those 30 or 40 storylines can be terrible. Sometimes a terrible idea sparks another idea that's actually really good. When you first start brainstorming storylines, don't judge yourself. And don't judge your writing too hard. Just try to have fun. When you're watching your favorite show, you're having fun. So also have fun when you're writing it. You want to have a spec episode that can last for a long time, but it all depends on the show, really. Many shows back in the 90s and 2000s would last about 10 seasons, but most shows today average about 5 seasons. Okay, now let's talk about writing a TV pilot. First things first, when you write a TV pilot, you want to find your concept. And you might have a general idea right now what your concept is, and if you don't, that's okay. And I think this lesson will help you pinpoint or at least brainstorm a concept that you really like. One really helpful way to think about your concept is to find your hook. What's your hook? A hook is something that makes it unique and hooks in your audience. Maybe that's why they call it a hook. So for example, the hook in The Goldbergs is that it takes place in the 1980s, and every episode is about something in the 80s. The hook for Dharma and Greg was a couple meets each other and marries each other on the same day, and now their lives are changed forever. Try to find a hook that will make you stand out from piles of scripts. After you find your hook, let's talk about the logline. A logline is a very short synopsis of your idea that you can easily pitch to cast, crew, managers, producers, whoever. Make your logline 30 words or less. Your logline might change later, but for today, write something down. If you want a better idea of a logline, use IMDb and look for the short synopsis that's written for every show and movie. You want a logline that grabs people's attention, and it's quick and catchy. The logline for my series, Monster Therapy, is monsters and their spouses work on relationship issues and marriage therapy. This is exactly what I said to people as I pitched it to them. I would then give examples, like how Jason's wife wants to replace his old ratty hockey mask, or how the children of the corn grew up and now they're adults of the corn, and they're sick of living in the corn. Take your time with brainstorming concept and logline. Feel free to grab a notebook and just sit down and write down a bunch of ideas that intrigue you. Don't be hard on yourself. This should be fun. Just take a scrap piece of paper and write something down. A lot of times, if you want to write good stuff, you need to brainstorm and write some bad stuff first. And that might mean writing some really bad loglines before you find a logline that you like. To tell you a quick story, I remember a few years ago, I was trying to write a new script, and I knew I wanted to write something with a musical element, but that's all I had. So I took a scrap sheet of paper, and I kept writing possible loglines until the whole sheet of paper was filled. I didn't judge myself as I did it. Most of them were about old people and music, and then finally I landed on one logline that I really loved, and that became the thing I wrote. The title of that script is called Punk Rock Grandpa, and the logline is a dying old man has his best last year of his life when he starts a punk rock band with his teenage grandson, and they become rock stars. After you have a logline and a concept, think about what could happen in the series. It could be cool moments, story arcs, a joke. Whatever keeps your brain thinking about it more and more and wanting to write more ideas down. And write them down as you go. Often as you look back at those ideas, you'll think about even more ideas to add. And when you pitch the series, You want to give examples of what could happen in other episodes. So think of several ideas for several episodes. After you have a main character, it often helps to think of dozens of storylines for that character, and then choose one of those storylines for your pilot. You want to have a strong A storyline for your main character in the pilot. And this storyline should also be a good, strong introduction for your audience. Your storyline and your series idea has to grab our attention. We'll dive more into writing later, but make sure the first 10 pages of your pilot episode are amazing. Your concept too. You want to make sure you keep the reader hooked. If you're writing a thriller, there better be some amazing thrills right away. For example, I don't remember exactly what happened in the pilot episode of 24, but I do remember when I was a kid, there was so much action and thrills in that series that everyone was talking about it when it first came out. You want that. You want to have the show that has everyone talking about it right away. If you're writing a comedy, make sure you have some big laughs and make them often. If you're writing a drama, make sure there's a lot of drama. You also want to have memorable characters too. But think about it like this. Your script has to be so good that a producer reads it and shares it with everyone in their office. You want people to talk about it. That's how you get meetings and get through the door. By being so good that whoever reads your script talks about it and they want to see it get made. To learn more about writing TV, you can check out my TV writing course. You can find this on my website at www.jordanimiola.com/students. Please subscribe for more tips, tricks, and advice on writing.